Welcome to episode 114, and today I'm joined by Peita Diamantidis, who is the co-founder of Caboodle Financial Services, which is a financial advice firm, and she's also the co-host of the Schitt with Money podcast, which is a rewatch of the Schitt's Creek TV show, but from a fun financial perspective. I never thought I'd use the word fun and financial together, but anyway, there we go. So welcome, Peita.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, it's great to have you. And, what we thought this podcast would be great to talk about today is just that link between financial well-being and, how we can support our employees in that way. Because over the last couple of years, we've seen an increase in employees valuing financial rewards, which isn't surprising given the economic environment we found ourselves in.
Yeah.
But there is that question around the link between financial stress and employee well-being. So I'd love to know, what do you see in your work? Has there been an impact or a noticeable change over the last few years?
Yeah, there certainly has. One of the things that's over a longer period, the really big shift is sort of financial stress or worry is no longer private. So years ago, it was a very private thing, right? Whereas now it's really showing up at work. It's burnout, absenteeism, decision fatigue, all those sort of things are showing up because of the financial stress or worry, right? So that's been a shift sort of across the workforce. I think the emotional, load of money, and that can be all sorts of things. It doesn't mean people can't pay their bills. It could be, I call it the sacrifice loop. So for some people, they're caught between, maybe teenage or about to be adult kids and aging parents. And they've got all these demands on them that at their heart are often financial worries. And so they're in this loop of worrying about everybody else and they've stopped worrying about themselves, and even that can hold weight, and so if they're worrying about that, it makes it very hard to be present at work. And really put their best foot forward, and then maybe even feel guilty about not putting their best foot forward, right? It's this spiral. It's terrible.
Yes.
And confusion and overwhelm is really damaging for people.
I was just wondering when you said about, it's no longer private. Do you think that's in part because of the pandemic? Like we saw in other areas of our life, it became much more open in the workplace because everyone suddenly saw each other's kids and their, dogs and cats and all the rest of it. So is that part of it as well, that we now feel, I guess, more open perhaps in talking about this?
Yeah, so certainly there's a sort of a window that's opened into people's worlds, hasn't it? In that sense. And just we're recording here, you can see behind me in my home office, all those sort of things have sort of had a glimmer into people's lives. But no surprise, social media has done this as well, because people are just sharing more of their lives generally, right? And money is a part of that. And there's so many, wonderful influencers out there literally showing you their budget. They're opening a spreadsheet and showing. So I think the views about that, for all it's still a bit taboo, money is a taboo topic, it has shifted, at least in terms of people's awareness of it, and so they're bombarded, with money stuff all the time, and it's probably a lead story in the news most nights.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so it's that, and that to me, the challenge with that is it's just more information. It's not helpful.
Yeah.
Right?
That's like social media, isn't it?
Right. Doom scrolling. It's that's the challenge is people. It's not that people need more info. They've got heaps, right? That's not what they need. They don't need financial facts. They need to rebuild confidence, sort of reclaim control.
Yeah.
And so we use an expression called money resilience. And I think that is really what people need, is the ability to sort of handle the highs and lows money-wise, so that then they feel like they can turn up and be present at work.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And, because I've been in HR for a long time, over 20 years, and, I remember way back when we were looking at employee benefits, and I was tasked with, what can we do for my financial, we didn't call it wellbeing then, but, financial help or information or what have you.
Yeah.
And our to-do was basically to go to the Superannuation fund and say, hey, can you come and, do a session with the employees? And they basically stand at the front of the room and tell everybody that they're not allowed to tell them anything. And give out some flyers.
Yeah.
So it can be tricky. And, I was having a look at CIPD, which is the professional body for HR and people development in the UK, because they talk about these key domains of wellbeing, and financial wellbeing is one of them. But at the same time, they have this research report where they said financial wellness is, essentially the poor relation of employee well-being because it's the least promoted in workplaces, and only a third of those employers that responded to their survey said they actually take action to help their employees with financial well-being. So does that surprise you? Why do you think that might?
Not at all. Not at all. And for two reasons. One, you just shared, it's dry. Everything, even when they want to, right? Even when they've got the best intentions, their first port of call is the super funds. And bless their cotton socks, but they just don't know how to tell a story and they don't know how to engage. And if they need to put any more graphs up, that just doesn't communicate with people. So I think that's a challenge. But I also think, and you would be, 100% aware of this, HR, but even more payroll, are just so wary of implying that they're giving advice or telling people what they should do, or there's a lot of tentativeness. That's a hard word to say. There's a lot of, they're really wary of it. And so I understand why they sort of go, maybe it's a bit too hard. And I think for employers, the boss, I wonder whether some of them think, well, is the staff just going to say, well, you could just give us a pay rise?
More money, yeah.
Right? I wonder if that's part of it. And so I think, in the environment right now, most bosses don't have extra budget for pay rises. That's a reality, but people are struggling. So to me, the gift is helping people get more out of the money they have. Yeah. That's really what you want to help them with. And that's not super, to be quite frank. Right? The super's for the future.
Yeah, that is part of it. I would think that if there's this idea that if we talk about money in the workplace and we acknowledge that that's helpful to your well-being, then yes, my next conversation with you is going to be, well, you can help my well-being by giving me a pay. Yeah. So you can see where that hesitancy would come
100%.
to do that. Hence it becomes easier to call the super funds and ask them to come out. Yeah.
And look, and I guess I'd get us all to think really carefully about that too, because in Australia, we are blessed with this very well-structured and long-standing superannuation environment. There's a clip already done for each paycheck broadly for most people. Is that really the first thing we should then educate them on? If it's automatic, maybe we worry about other stuff first. Yeah. So I think actually that sort of default, I understand why it's a relationship they have. They're clearly financial people. I get why that's the case, but to me, actually, it's a little broken. It's no, they could probably just let that tick along for a while. Yeah. Let's focus on more of the now. And the now is where the stress sits for most people.
Yeah, so that sort of takes me, I guess, to, people think about financial education or literacy. They start thinking about, budgeting or super. So what do you think's missing? What will help people to engage and make changes?
Yeah. So, and look, I say this, my training, would you believe, before financial advice was actuarial studies. So, for those that don't know, that's like a financial mathematician, right? Nerdy as all get out. The real issue, and I preempted that because what I'm about to say may surprise people, financial well-being is treated like a maths problem, but it's not one. Employees don't need the science. They don't need to understand percentage points and formulas and trends and even really detailed investing issues. What they need is inspiration. We need to bring a human element to this, right? Because traditional literacy, financial literacy sessions sort of skip the part where people connect with their own money story, right? How do they feel about money? They sort of skip that entirely and just lecture, and nobody signed up for a degree in financial advice or financial literacy. They want to feel engaged. And so we actually shifted our efforts some time ago sort of from education and literacy to behaviour change, right? They don't need to know more. They just need to do things a little differently. Yeah. That's all. And that feels like it's in their own power too, right? They don't need to feel overwhelmed by it, or I don't know enough, or I'm stupid, I can't get it, which, to be frank, lots of people have trauma from high school maths and sort of carried it into their, feelings about money. So, we start with even curiosity and courage. We've got an Imaginarium tool where we help people dream about the future. What do you want to do? What are the adventures you want to go on? And then teach them a system on how to fund those dreams. We use 3D glasses, we use storytelling, relatable life moments, all of that, so that we can inspire them first, right? And then once you inspire them, they're leaning in, right? And it's like, oh, tell me how I do that. It's a bit, I don't know whether you've seen recently, there's a teacher in the US that's gone back to that Mentos in the Coke bottle trick where it explodes, right? And the kids are like, woo, we love science, right? I think we've got to do a bit more of that in money, and we've got to sort of get their attention first, get them excited, feeling great and feeling curious. And then, of course, we can teach them some things after that. We've got to get them engaged, you know, and a slide with a graph and a couple of lines on it isn't going to do that.
So can you tell us more about that? Who are the types of people that you work with, and what are the kinds of things that you do?
Yeah, so look, I've done sessions, in workplaces from massive tech companies through to little small businesses. So it really, it's not a surprise that a similar session works.
Yes.
That sometimes it becomes a bit more like a keynote and less like a workshop, but we start with, whether it's virtual or in person, something to spark their curiosity. So it is behavioural change. It's getting them to actually build an Imaginarium, this book with all these sort of ideas. We talk about what cash flow automation looks like. What could they do now? What's one thing they could do? So we really focus on energizing the team and then giving them some things to do, even a workbook through the session. So we really want to sort of appeal to all the different types of learners. Are they visual? Are they written? Audio. So I've really designed it to capture all of their attention. They potentially can use their phones during this session. Like, we really sort of don't treat this like old school, one should sit, get, a number and be hoping it's over. We're really trying to engage them in the session. Interestingly, for employers who really get it, then often will follow up with an anonymous Q&A. So we use this sort of virtual, sort of login for people where they can put questions about money or even super anything anonymously in, and then we do a hot seat. I'll sit there and the employer or some other member of the team is going to fire these questions at me. Yeah, so it means there is no stupid question because nobody's going to know it's them. Yeah. Right. And so we find once they're energized, then they're like, ooh, I can see this is a barrier I want to ask, and so we find that works really well, and unlocks even more questions, So then what becomes clear is there'll be themes, so that'll be a particular topic, and maybe we do another session down the track, or we get in whoever might be able to help with that particular issue. Sometimes it's tax. I mean, it could be all sorts of things. So it's very much about that inspiration session and then getting into the nitty gritty, giving them some action, some things they can do. It is tenfold more effective if the employer is supportive. What I mean by that, so cash flow automation is a way to just sort of set up your expenses, your bank account, such that you've always got enough for every bill that might arrive. And you also know how much goes into your adventure fund, right? So it's quite energizing as well as grown up, right? Adulting. Absolute tick, right? So you're well organised. So what we find is that some employers will willingly do pay splitting. So rather than the team member having to set that up in their accounts, in a pay slip, the employer's happy to bump it into 2 or 3 accounts. So that can be a way to support. And also we've got, a money profile that we do with people. And so some employers get the staff to do that and it's got all sorts of, what are your money values? How do you learn? All sorts of things in that they can take forward. So to me, the only other thing I'd say about it is, it needs to be optional, but encouraged.
Yeah.
It's that fine line, right? So it can't be a ticker box, and it can't feel like a ticker box. Yeah. And that's part of the reason I did the 3D glasses. And when I present, often I've got either a sparkly jacket on or something surprising and confronting, because I want them to feel like this isn't a OH&S session. I mean, that's the equivalent, right? When you've all got to turn up and bless them. I mean, they've got to do the job, but okay, I've just got to get through this, and now, all right, we've got 10 minutes more, so that's the last thing you want them to feel like this is. And so the more the employer can position that beforehand, and that they feel that, it's why it can work really well in person, because when we're building those Imaginariums with the team, we get them to share things they'd love to do, and somebody that nobody knew wants to pull apart a Harley and rebuild it, or and it's the guy from IT or something. I mean, you completely
hobbies come out. Yeah,
exactly. And suddenly they're more human, like they're really human, and people have dimension. And I mean, I've even done a session where somebody had a weird and wonderful adventure, quite detailed, that they wanted to go on, but didn't know how they were going to pull it off. It was one of those things, I just don't know how I can ever do this. And another person in the room knew somebody that could pull that off for them. Wow. And that's the point. Like,
Yeah.
how wonderful are those stories to share?
Yeah.
Rather than, this is what a percentage is
Yeah.
and this is what compound interest is. So, yeah, so that to me is the key. This should feel like fun, you
Yeah.
know?
And I think, what you're describing is very different to what we were just talking about. Like that kind of session is not going to have an employee coming over to the manager and going, hey, now I need a pay rise. Like it's
No.
very different, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I loved, you mentioned before about your money story, which I've read a few people talking about this, but for those that haven't heard this, can you describe what your money story is?
Yeah. So all of us have experiences from childhood, and I mean quite little, that have built how we approach and feel about money. So there's going to be these moments in time, and you won't even realize it necessarily until you start digging a bit, that have defined how you react to money issues. So one of my money stories is, and I'm happy to share, is that I really struggle with the whole charging people thing, right? So I'm one of those people where it's, and I love what I do, and I guess we've got to charge, and there's this disconnect for me about the gift and I love sharing the insights and transforming people's lives versus the actual charging. Well, as it turns out, my story comes from the fact that when I first came out of uni, I worked in investment banking and never felt comfortable with the environment and the way that they were quite the opposite of that.
Yes.
Right? Charge first, deliver later, and charge them more. And it made an imprint to the extent that I guess it's now, 25 years later, and I'm still dealing with that story.
Yes.
So these are these little moments. Some of them will be when we're teenagers, some of them will be witnessing your parents and the environment they were in, or somebody you knew, you grew up with. All these things form who we are and how we relate to money. And it's just that, like anything, when we get to know ourselves a bit better, it's just knowing it, you can look out for it.
Yeah,
Right?
and I think that's how this becomes so related to well-being as well, because,
Yes.
part of really that whole subjective well-being is actually understanding ourselves. And when we're feeling a certain way, to be able to go, okay, I'm feeling frustrated because that's my money story talking.
Yes, exactly. And having language for that. I mean, I love doing the money profiles with couples because it gives them language to stop saying that's
Stop
stupid,
spending. Yeah.
right? And start saying, oh, that's because,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that it helps because, of course, we're not stupid. We're reacting. We're emotional beings, right? So when we do, even if we use logic, and that's always so fascinating, is for very logic-driven people, they see themselves as very logical when in fact they're quite emotional.
Yeah.
It's just that their money story is rooted in logic to power through probably chaos.
Yeah.
Right. So they're falling back on, I want to control the things that are around me because I either lived in a difficult environment or we never had money, so it'll all be rooted in that money story, whereas they're holding on to the logic,
Our
So,
emotions
yeah,
are so buried, and we
yes,
explain it through logic, but it may not actually be the cause.
not at all. I mean, but the rule of thumb for me is we make decisions on emotions and we justify it with logic.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah.
and that's quite common.
Yes.
Very common
Yeah.
with people. So,
And one of the things that you mentioned before in terms of a practical thing that businesses can do is pay splitting, whereby, you give people the option to say, well, you don't have to have, all of your pay go into this account. You can actually determine which accounts where you want it to go.
yeah.
I think that's a great, practical tip for people. Do you have any other top tips for business owners and leaders to get started with supporting their team members?
Yeah, so I think, to be honest, one of the best things that somebody can do is lead by example. So this will come from probably the business owner or somebody, senior, is the more they share either their own money stories, the adventures they want to go on, because the reason we focus so much on that is that drives behavior. So if we're like, I really want to go to Japan for for the Blossom Festival, then suddenly it's easier to stop using Uber Eats and just, right? So we've got to connect it to those things. Well, if you just start with the sharing of the adventures or the things you'd love to do, that's actually not quite as vulnerable, is it? So it's not sharing anything about your finances or whether you can save or not. It's just sharing those other things. So leaders can do a lot by opening themselves up to that. And I think that's good leadership anyway, right? I think it's great to let people see a bit of yourself and really help them understand who you are and what you'd love to do. And so that to me is interesting. I mean, I've even seen people have, my next big adventure on the bottom of their email. right? It's there in their footer, and they use it to connect with clients.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting way to define ourselves.
Yes.
And of course, it doesn't need to be travel. It could be, a massive book you want to read. It could be a restaurant you've always wanted to go to. I mean, it could be also, I want to learn to crochet. Honestly, they can be as broad and as weird and wonderful as you like. But that sharing within the team of that can be a great way to create connection without too much vulnerability.
What's your big adventure then, Peter?
Right. So I had a massive year of adventure last year. So honestly, hardcore. So South Island of New Zealand, US for a trip, Tokyo and Kyoto for Japan. And I went to Noma. Anybody listening may know that Noma is one of the top 3 restaurants in the world. He did a residency in Kyoto. So that was our 20th wedding anniversary. And at the end of the year, we went to the UK and to Marrakesh.
Oh. Were you actually in Australia at all last year?
Well, it sounds like I wasn't. I was, but it was a big year. And so this year, lots of my adventures are more homebound. So one of them is, in fact, one of the things I want to do this year is start a games night with my mates.
Yeah.
Because we just don't get time. We go out to dinner and things. We don't get time to connect, and that sort of gibberish and, and hanging out and just enjoying each other's company. So that's one of mine for this year, because last year was a little full on. You're traveling too much when you nearly make platinum.
Yes. That's so true.
That's the benchmark. Like, other people are like, woohoo. I'm like, no, that's not good.
I love it. So finally, what's the best way to get in touch with you if people would like to explore this a little bit more with their teams or just follow your content? Yes.
So definitely LinkedIn. Peita MD, PEITAMD, you'll find me on there. And you can, I'm happy for even people to book a chat from LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way to find me. And the key thing is it can be as low key as you like. I've done 30-minute sessions online, virtually, that people dial in, and I've booked in a few months to be at the annual event and doing a keynote. So, it really depends on the business and their style and what works. And don't be shy of the virtual thing, I'd say to people, because sure, in person's great, but if your team are all over the place or they work different shifts or, then virtual, I can deliver in virtual. It takes a bit more energy, to be honest, because you've really got to bring it. But it's possible. Better to do it than not.
Yeah.
So, we make it fun. They still engage. And so, please do reach out on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from anybody that feels they could really engage their team and get their financial wellbeing and confidence really, through the Richter scale, having lots of adventures.
Any last thoughts, any last tips you'd like to share?
I think just making money in some way part of the conversation. So, and that's hard as an employer and in the workplace. It's why, whether it's an adventure fund, we've started talking about for women. So if they've got groups of women in the workplace and they want to do specific efforts for them, we've got a session on building a menopause fund. So you can attach it to life's biggest hurdles or things that are going on for people. That's another way to approach this. But have the conversations and don't be shy of crossing two things. That's how that menopause fund session came up. Is somebody approached me and said, Peter, could you do a session on menopause and money? I'm like, well, sure. Right. And of course, as it turns out,
subjects all together.
Correct. And when I combine them, I'm like, oh my, massive impact. Absolutely. I'll do that session. So if you've got a topic and you think, hey, I wonder how this could combine with money, ask. Yeah. Reach out. And whether it's me or somebody else I refer, to you to, if they're a better vibe, then, just get creative that way.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much for joining me, Peter. It's been such an interesting conversation, and I really love the energy that you bring to what can often be seen as quite a dry topic. So thanks so much for today.
Not at all. It was an absolute pleasure.
And for everyone listening, I'm going to put Peter's details into the show notes of this episode, so you can click the link to get in touch with her. And if you've received value from this episode, I'd love it if you could leave a rating or a review over Apple Podcasts or Spotify, so someone else can also find the episodes to help with their business. Episodes are released every Monday, so click the subscribe button and you'll be notified of when it's available. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any feedback, questions or ideas for future episodes, head on over to amplifyhr.com.au or connect with me on LinkedIn and we can start a conversation.